Good afternoon, everybody. We are just going to give it a few more moments while we await for all the various attendees to join in and come into the in through the virtual doors, as it were. But lovely to see so many people crowding on through and into the room. So thank you so much for joining us today. So my name, for those of you that don't know me, is Jessie Wild, and I'm one of the directors of the Housing Festival, and the Housing Festival are partnering with Building Festival to run this exhibition. So this webinar is part of an event series accompanying the New Homes and New Ways exhibition, which is currently featured in the public gallery of the Building Centre. If you haven't been down, it's just off Tottenham Court Road, to get my words in the right order, and is open until the 21st of February. So it's free to enter, and you can check out the Building Centre's opening times on their website. So do have a look at that, and would really highly recommend you go down and have a look at that exhibition. The exhibition looks at a number of different things, but essentially covering that title, New Homes in New Ways, looking at how the role MMC can play in solving some of our housing challenges as a country. There is, alongside that, a series of webinars, of which this is one, and a full list of those webinars can be found on either the Building Centre website or the Housing Festival website. I also want to just flag to you the summit. So as part of the exhibition that's running over the 4 months at the Building Centre, we're hosting an in-person, a real event, summit in February. It's 2 days, 12th and 13th of February. So do put that into your diary, and tickets are available now. So you can find those on either of the organisation's websites. It's 2 days of in-person panel discussions, workshops, networking opportunities, and we're trying to bring together key voices, public and private sector, to help drive collaboration forward, really, and mobilise an uptick in the delivery of social rent homes. So as I said, tickets are available on the websites now, and we'd love to see you there if you're available to join us. You can also find the programme online as well at the moment if you want to see who's going to be there and what they're speaking on. That said, now let me get into the meat of this webinar. I'm thrilled to be joined today for our webinar on models and contracts that support MMC by Professor David Mosley of King's College London. And David is a lead author and pioneer in the development of the innovative PPC 2000 suite of partnering contracts. I'm also joined by Mac, who's the projects and construction partner at Towers and Hamlins LLP, who similarly has particular experience of advising on alliancing, partnering and framework agreements. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from both of them today. So together through this webinar, we're going to provide insight into the key aspects of delivery and this important stage in the journey of the wider MMC sector. So I'm going to hand over very, very shortly to Professor David Mosley, who will give us a short presentation, who will hand over to Mac, who will give a presentation as well. Can I encourage you to find the Q&A box down in the bottom of your screen? You'll see if you flip to the bottom, you should have a Q&A box. Please do put all the questions that come up for you as you're listening to the two presentations in that box, and that will inform how our conversation goes forward. So once both presentations have done, I will then fire these questions at our two panelists, and hopefully very informally we'll be able to have a bit of a conversation about all of the things that we've discussed so far. So without further ado, let me hand over to David. Thank you so much, David.
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. A pleasure to be speaking to you today. I'm going to look at a contract form called FAC1, how that delivers better housing, in a particular better MMC, and its links to a report called Constructing the Gold Standard that came from an independent review I was commissioned to provide for the government during COVID lockdown, when all the consultees were very available, and which has been accepted very widely by central and local government and a number of registered providers, and certainly by the industry. Can I have the next slide, please? What it does is pick up client and industry views that construction frameworks are the best medium through which procurement and contracting can deliver transformational improvements. And I think in all sectors, including housing, we want those improvements. MMC is an important medium for those improvements. It's linked to tier 2 supply chain relationships as well as tier 1. It's linked to SMEs and social value and local and regional opportunities. So it's not just business as usual. Frameworks were seen as the way to do any kind of transformational improvement in procurement and contracting, and also to move us forward, to overcome what I've called there the groundhog day of lost learning from one project to the next, with a picture of a groundhog to remind us. That constructing the gold standard is available online. Can I have the next slide, please? I did not mention the FAC Framework Alliance contract when I went out on the consultation for that review, but many participants did. But they also started with a range of housing case studies. Housing frameworks have very much led the way over the years. And there are very interesting examples of how clients and contractors working properly with subcontractors and manufacturers have achieved efficiency savings, not discounts, not lowball bidding, but efficiency savings of up to 18.5%, plus innovation and improved quality, safety, and social environmental value. Those are processes. They're long-term relationships, that's for sure, but they're a move away from traditional lowball bidding, and they're very much in tune with MMC, where long-term commitments create the stability that you need for investment. But these gold standard contributors, and there's 120 of them listed in the report, supported a collaborative framework contract, a framework alliance contract, with an outcome focus so the industry can innovate, flexibility, of course, for different needs, and then processes, contractual processes, not just risk allocation, not just admin, but processes to drive improved value and to integrate the different contributions from clients, managers, suppliers, and Tier 2 supply chain members. They also supported, to my delight, FAC1, which is the only published standard form that does that, and which can be used with JCT or NEC or PPC project contracts, so a very flexible standard form. That's been around since 2016, and it is used on MMC frameworks as well as consultant and main contractor and supplier frameworks. And yes, that figure is correct. £100 billion is quite a lot of take up in 8 years. Can I have the next slide, please? I think we've skipped one slide. Thank you. So what does it do? This is an integrator. The idea that each JCT or NEC or PPC contract doesn't stand alone to deliver a program of work, and that a framework is not just for admin. The idea is that parties, that's one or more clients, one or more contractors, one or more supply chain members, if they're going to do it right, need to plan together and manage risk together. And they need, for a client's benefit, to have consistent working practices as well as for their own, particularly in a whole life environment where you don't want to be repairing and operating totally different boilers or windows or whatever. And then we have these systems, these timetable systems, to seek improved value through all of the parties' contributions. There is a protection of intellectual property, because clearly people are only going to share ideas within given rules. And as I say, there is a timetable through which the parties pursue their relationship. So it's something that goes way beyond conventional frameworks, but still leaves your JCT or your NEC or your PPC to deliver each phase of the work. And we have something called supply chain collaboration. That's not a buzzword. That is a contractual process that has been tested and endorsed in the public sector for 10 years now, and which every local authority and the housing association should apply in any event, because you are basically saying, after we've appointed contractors, then we will revisit the best suppliers and subcontractors, the opportunities for local businesses, the opportunities for improved efficiency, the opportunities to extend the Tier 2 relationships into something longer term. However good your Tier 1 contractors are, sometimes they appoint short, sharp arrangements for their subcontractors which don't enable full contributions. The FAC describes systems to get over that. Can I have the next slide, please? And FAC, next slide, please. Next, FAC is recommended independently for MMC. The blueprint for a housing industrial strategy back in 2020 said more innovative and progressive contracts reflect earlier and closer engagement with manufacturers. And this is so important for MMC. They refer, to my delight, the FAC1 form and the long-term strategic relationships that enable one or more clients to integrate housing programs through smart construction, then linked to the separate design, construction and operation contracts. So that's independent endorsement. It's very nice to have. The next slide, please. And how's that delivered? Well, we go back to that gold standard report, which is generic. It's beyond housing and, of course, beyond one contract form, and says it's very important to improve supplier investment in MMC and other offsite technologies by awarding framework call-off contracts for portfolios of work. We can't do it one little project at a time. MMC, like so many things in construction, benefits and attracts investment through stability and long-term programming. And as I say, that is what the FAC does. It takes multiple projects. Even if each client only has a relatively small housing program, it enables aggregation and standardization, and each of the clients can learn from each other, and each of them can appoint contractors and subcontractors consistently. And that gets us to something that, to me, as I say, every local authority, every housing association should jump on, because it's proven and because tier one contractors are willing to do it, which is revisit the people they prefer to work with, and look at the ones that are the best local and regional options, and look at the manufacturers and subcontractors that will deliver client outputs. If we have budgets and we have open book of the sort of things that Asset Matpool is going to talk about, this works very well. Can I have the next slide, please? So just as I come to a close, there are case studies, there is guidance. This is not theoretical. There is a thing called the 2023 FAC1 Handbook, which has 30 case studies and many, many best practice notes, but they include Crown Commercial Service, who use FAC1 for all of their procurements. That included an offsite construction solutions framework, appointing 29 manufacturers with a range of MMC solutions. That obviously is for call-off by any public sector client. And then there's the Offsite Homes Alliance with 23 registered housing providers led by Great Places, delivering £2 billion worth of MMC under a framework across the north of England. And there is the Building Better and Procurement for Housing framework, delivering a programme of 800 homes worth £600 million over 5 years. Their quote was, "These collaborative relationships are important because sharing information and learning together are critical to improving the take-up of MMC and overcoming traditional barriers." And I couldn't put that better myself. Outside housing, very interesting work by Ministry of Justice with multiple contractor alliances specifically designed to create and support consistent long-term tier 2 MMC appointments. So I hope you're tempted to look at some of those case studies. I hope you're tempted to look at that handbook for practice notes and examples of how an FAC arrangement will deliver MMC. And just my last slide, please. As I said, you can get the gold standard. Well, there's another quote. In addition to the Bermuda Triangle, the gold standard approach, which is 24 very clear recommendations available free online, and the FAC framework contracts as a medium for the contractual section of that set of recommendations, are designed to ensure that collaborative plans and commitments are not lost in the Bermuda Triangle of idealistic debate, cynical criticism, and unrealized good intentions. When we talk about collaboration, when we talk about working together, we can sometimes lose touch with commercial machinery that we need. And I hope this has been of interest. You can find out more in relation to FAC at the link that I gave you there, more in relation to constructing the gold standard at the second link, and more in relation to that handbook at the third link. And I'm delighted now to hand over to Asad Matpool for his presentation on project alliancing.
Thank you, David. And thank you also earlier for Jessica's introduction. And as she noted at the outset, we obviously have questions and answers that are going into the Q&A box at the moment, but we'll come back at the end of my brief talk. I'll go back to Jessica so that she can chair a Q&A session. So I will just, if I may, give you 10 or 15 minutes specifically following on from what David has talked about in terms of FAC at framework level, and facilitating MMC, I wanted to talk to you today about the possibility of using project partnering contracts, and particularly the relaunch of PPC 2000 in the form of PPC 25 this year, as a way of facilitating and gaining efficiency and better outcomes from collaborative working. I will just give you a brief overview of the form of contract and highlight a few things which are particularly pertinent to MMC projects. And that I have assumed that there are some people in the room who do have some knowledge of PPC 2000 and therefore understand the basis of this, and others who do not. So I'll go through a bit about the evolution of PPC 2000, first authored by Professor David Mosey, and my refresh of that in PPC 25 years later. And then I shall talk about these other points, which are particularly pertinent to MMC and also are the changes from PPC 2000 to PPC 25. And in the few minutes that I have, I'm hoping that I will pique your interest to follow up and see how that progresses during this year of its launch. So PPC 2000 launched in 2000, and following on from the Egan and Latham reports, a response to the issues in the construction industry. We talk a lot about modern methods of construction and issues in the construction industry that are relevant to this very moment. And of course, a lot of them are issues that have been relevant to the construction industry for a long time and still require some resolution. A lot of the things that are now seen as best practice in construction contracting in the UK derive in part from those principles that were set out in PPC 2000 as contractual processes. And as a form of flattery in other forms of contract, you will see some of the things that I talk about are now prevalent in other forms of contract as well. The cornerstone of that in reality is that collaborative working is not something that we do separately from contractual relationships. And in reality, in order to best effect collaborative working, it is important to entrench those so that they sit within the contract processes rather than having separate best practice project management that sit away from the contractual relationships, so that when there are issues on projects, which of course there inevitably are, that the collaborative working that is required from the parties is entrenched and aligned to the contractual requirements. Of those things, the key parts which are different in PPC 2000 and have been continued in PPC 25 are firstly the contractual pre-construction phase. So PPC 2000 as was and PPC 25 have as at the core of the contract terms a pre-construction phase, and at the end of the pre-construction phase, a construction phase notice that leads into a contractual construction phase. And the difference between this form of contract and others is that all of the contract terms assume that two-stage process and cater for that two-stage process. The second is that it's a multi-party contract. And again, going back to a point I mentioned earlier, the point is that construction projects themselves are a multi-party endeavour. And so aligning the contract to that and allowing for the possibility of joint exercises amongst the construction team that are contractually catered for as a joint endeavour in terms of the planning and carrying out of the project and the management of risk and the project itself as part of an overall contractual structure that allows for parties, in particular parties that are specialist subcontractors, the manufacturers of MMC products that are going to be the cornerstone of an MMC project, allowing them to also join the main contract and be party to those discussions, is something that's very specific to PPC 2000, and that has been continued in PPC 25. And there is also the joint management of projects using timetables to which all of the construction team are signing up to, so that the activities can, and the interrelationships between the different parties can be organised and managed as part of the contractual processes. As I said, the collaborative approach is within the core terms of the contract, and so that includes the open sharing of information amongst the parties to the project, the exchange of information and the management of activities and timetabling of activities, the collective decision making to an extent, and some things which have been replicated in other forms of contracts in terms of the early warning of issues and the dispute resolution processes. All of those things have been continued into PPC 25. And so that core of the contract terms being aligned to proper processes around good management of contracts has been continued. So for the last few minutes, I'll just go through a few of those other points which are particularly relevant to PPC. And these are all things which are the evolution of PPC 2000 into PPC 25. And that evolution has in part been referenced to the principles in the construction playbook, which talk about specific elements of construction contracting that ought to enhance construction projects, and also the government commercial function guidance note on modern methods of construction. So I shall flag a few points in that. As I've discussed earlier, one of the cornerstones of PPC is the early appointment of the construction team and ensuring that there is a proper managed pre-construction phase, and that has been enhanced in PPC 25 by the inclusion of the possibility of early consultant appointments prior to the rest of the team being appointed, and that all of those appointments will then be subsumed into a single multi-party contract once the team has been formulated. And that aligns with, firstly, that general principle that actually we need to have a proper assessment of the project with the relevant parties involved during a well-formed pre-construction phase. And something which the construction playbook majors on, which is that importance of that pre-construction phase in producing the best outcomes. So, as well as the general principle of having an early involvement of all of the construction team there, PPC 25 also includes these early consultant appointments. We also have the importance of design development to MMC projects and generally to construction projects, and various pointers to the importance of setting out on a collaborative basis the different responsibilities of the different parties to the construction team, including in respect of design. And in particular, the MMC guidance note points to intellectual property, to copyright, and the fact that there will be some necessity for the teams to look at that specifically in going through design development on MMC projects. What PPC has always had and has been developed in PPC 25 is a form of design development process which includes explicit involvement of all the relevant parties and a responsibility that is expressed in the contract for the inputs at different times of those different parties. The enhancement in PPC 25 is a design responsibility matrix, which again, you will understand in good well-formulated projects as part of the proper management of projects, these things will exist, but here it now exists in the construction contract as well. And of course, when it comes to MMC projects, the various inputs of specialist supply chain designers in formulating the project as part of the pre-construction phase, and then to the extent that there's relevant design being carried out during the construction phase, is catered for in PPC. The MMC guidance note is explicit about BIM, about how the use of BIM enhances projects, and going back to David's work some time ago, that David did lead on a research into UK contracting for BIM, and what was explicit in the outcomes of that research was that the evolution and outcomes from BIM can be influenced by the choice of procurement models and the agreement of contract terms and processes that do enhance the use of BIM. What we have in PPC 2000, which again has been enhanced in PPC 25, is experience of using a multi-party contract in order to ensure that the building information modelling and the exchange of information is not something that sits separately from the rest of the relationship in respect of the construction project. And it, as well as having exemplar projects such as Cookham Wood that MOJ have carried out, that have been audited by the central government audit function and have shown the efficiency by using this form of contract and this form of contractual relationship. We also have in PPC 25 explicit references to the ISO and to BIM standards and a BIM execution plan, Alliance Information Manager, and the common data environment, all within the core contract terms. Again, briefly, we've got some reference in respect to the Chancery Lane project, that lawyers' view as to how we can assist in decarbonisation and using contracts to enhance that. And PPC 25 now has reference to net zero and sustainability action plan, also has a reference to the project carbon budget, and importantly, as part of the contract mechanisms in respect of change, looks at how that project carbon budget changes. And of course, you will understand from the involvement of second tier, third tier supply chain as part of the construction team in the contractual mechanism under PPC, you will understand that will help to facilitate the importance of Scope 3 as part of looking at net zero, the ability to look into supply chains and to openly exchange information with supply chain. Also included within PPC is the possibility of the use of project bank accounts. And this is the next slide, is what passes for me as a lawyer's joke, which is the guidance that was issued in 2012 about project bank accounts, which was issued by a Cabinet Office, I think at the time, which talked about the fact that project bank accounts should be used wherever possible. And in reality, of course, as we all know, there is still very little take-up of project bank accounts. Of course, in that guidance, it talked effectively about all of the benefits of using project bank accounts. And those things are still benefits, but we know the reality of the situation is that people have not felt that those advantages outweigh the disadvantages, particularly in terms of tier 1 cash flow, but also the burden of administration around project bank accounts is perceived to be too great for them to be implemented. We do have issues with MMC projects, of course, in terms of the viability, the financial risk, insolvency risk, and of course, there is this solution which still exists and exists in PPC 25 to use a project bank account, which might alleviate some of those issues. And finally, I've come on to building safety because these days I don't do any talk on construction contracting, which doesn't have an element of building safety in it, and I will continue to do that. Not least that there are some elements of my views on construction contracting generally, which have been highlighted in the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report, including that a casual approach to contractual relationships is a recipe for disaster. What we have done in PPC 25, which is relevant to MMC projects, but relevant to all construction projects, is include within the contractual mechanisms, not just for higher risk buildings, but for all projects, the requirements for mandatory occurrence reporting systems, for a change control log, and for a golden thread of information. But you will understand, again, from what I've said already about the multi-party nature of PPC, that there is a clear requirement as part of the contractual process for PPC to allocate responsibility to exchange information in a way that will enhance the building safety elements of the project. And so, as the construction playbook says, the contract is where all the key elements of the project are drawn together. And although, of course, prevalent within the industry are other forms of contract that can be used well, managed well, you have within PPC 25 what I consider to be best practice in all aspects of construction contracting. So you have an opportunity in this year when PPC 25 is launched to use a new way of contracting, which is based on a form of contract that's had 25 years worth of good experience in order to effect change on your projects as well. So thank you very much for your time, and I shall hand back over to Jessica in order to share the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Mac. Thank you so much, David, for your presentations. Really, really interesting. I'm going to dive in. We've had a lot of questions in the chat, and so I'm going to kind of come to them separately. I've also got a few that have been submitted ahead of time as well. We may not get time to answer all the questions, but if anyone else listening has got questions that aren't already in the Q&A, please do add them into the Q&A box. But let's kick off with just some really practicals from Jonathan Griffiths here. Is the PPC 25 available for use yet, or when is it going to be published and available for use? Mac, I'll come to you for that one.
Sure. It will be published in spring of this year, late spring of this year. So we're just finalising the dates. So it will be available from late spring onwards. It is for in terms of the use of it. There's been discussion about Pathfinder projects as well, but in reality, it is very similar to in its structuring to PPC 2000, and there's lots of information in respect of projects that have been carried out under PPC 2000. And again, I should, if I am able to, share some information around the existing projects that have been carried out under PPC 2000, if there's a possibility when I don't know whether the slides are being circulated, but if I'm able to, I'll add in that there is the PPC 2000 website, which refers to a number of projects that have been carried out under that form.
That'd be brilliant. And I suppose a sort of follow-up question from that is what do you see potentially are the biggest barriers to the uptake and the use of PPC 25 as opposed to PPC 2000?
Well, I mean, at its height, PPC 2000 was taking up 8% of the UK construction contracted construction market, as opposed to sort of JCT around 50% and NEC around 20-25%. So no matter that, it is, as I have said in my talk, I do believe it's to entrench the best practice of construction contracting in the UK. It is, of course, always difficult to, when people are used to using a specific form of contract, to move away from that. And there is an element of work that we need to do in order for people to share best practice, for there to be processes that are clear, that people can pick up this form of contract and use it. So there is an information point that we need to get over in order to effect it. In reality, when we're talking about new homes, a very large part, I'd say between 80 and 90% of the projects that were carried out on the PPC 2000 were actually housing projects. So if there is a part of the UK construction market that I think will be able to pick up this form of contract and use it, it will be the housing part of the market. And that is partly because of the way in which the housing industry works in the UK, which is that actually people are very good at sharing best practice, very good about sharing information about how to use forms of contract. And so in reality, I think there should be a good uptake of this form of contract.
Brilliant. And I think that in some ways links to another question we've got in the Q&A. So from Marcus Harling, a big practical issue is the lack of portfolio or aggregation by RPs, except the largest, and local authorities, where, as he rightly points out, resource has been largely hollowed out. So many requirements often then emerge staccato, which often prevents innovation. So how do we change that, sort of those dropping of bits and pieces, and how do we kind of move that forward so that we can move together in a much more constructive direction?
Well, that is at the heart of the gold standard. It's also at the heart of the two housing examples I gave, involving multiple registered providers working together. But constructing the gold standard recognised that there are 2,000 frameworks out there, far more than the capacity of the marketplace, far more than the pipeline of work. And to have those that link the parties to each other, rather than just invite them to just subscribe to a glossy website, and have those that use contractual machinery as well as procurement machinery to establish a proper pipeline. I think people have this sort of binary thing. If I can't guarantee my own pipeline of work, I can't say anything. But actually, the industry know that things are subject to funding cycles, subject to planning, subject to other changed circumstances, and that a prediction of a pipeline of work is investable, as long as there's proper machinery and transparent machinery for who gets what work. Again, people hate a lot of frameworks. My quote about the framework being the best medium for transformational improvement, the corollary of that is there's a load of bad practice in frameworks where people don't get a share of work or an understanding of why they're getting it or not, and where clients, and this comes to your point, Jesse, use it as a port of convenience, but don't see why they should share their knowledge or their plans with other clients. This isn't going to work. And Marcus is absolutely right, and we haven't fixed it in one go, but we do have 5 framework providers who have been through an independent verification process as regards the gold standard. Out of those 5, 4 of them are using FAC1. That's not a bad strike rate, but it is a tool like other tools. That gold standard verification establishes whether they have a convincing pipeline of work and intelligent management to sustain that and get the best out of it. So what I'm hoping we'll get to, and Marcus is aware of my work here, a situation where clients and bidders choose gold standard frameworks because they know they have an intelligent system for improving value, and where clients subscribe to the sharing of knowledge subject to IP protections to do that. But we're not there yet. But that's the road. We need clear parameters and clear independent accreditation of the parties who are doing it right.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Let me move on to the next question. I'm going to take one here from Jez Sweetland. So of the 100 billion FAC1 take up on frameworks, do you have any data about how widely it's been adopted within the sort of the resi housing as opposed to much more larger build contracts like the MOD and the NHS, etc.?
Yeah, I saw that question. Great question. I looked in the framework book guide. 11 of the 30 case studies are housing case studies, are for FAC1 and its prototypes. But an even better place is just go to that website in my final slide. That records under a particular section on case studies, lots and lots of housing uses of FAC1. The early uptake of FAC1 was very much in the housing sector, and it remains a major part of the picture.
Fab. Thank you so much, David. Another question, David, probably for you, but Mac, please do come in if you want. If the client or employer uses a traditional contract, such as FIDIC yellow, can FAC1 be used by the main contractor towards its T2 supply chain and achieve the potential of FAC1?
So interesting, because FAC1 links closely to PPC 25 in terms of getting the best out of the tier 2 supply chain. In the guide are case studies of contractors such as Kier who have used FAC1 to develop their supply chain relationships, and that can be done on one huge complex project, which is perhaps where a FIDIC Yellow Book would come in, but it can also be used on a program of work. Big highways program, in the case of Kier, for example, at Surrey, they used it to as the lead party to develop their supply chain relationship. So great question that. Again, the breadth of use of this form for different purposes has been very interesting. It is captured in some of these case studies in the handbook.
Thank you, David. Mac, did you want to come in?
Yes, yeah, if I could, please. I mean, I think there's, again, it goes back to the earlier point about the likelihood of take up of PPC 25 as a different form of contract from those forms of contract that particular clients are used to using. Now, you've got, if you want to effect change, you have to find ways to change people's attitude towards their project, and a way might be to use a different form of contract for the actual construction contracting. And of course, PPC 25 has, as PPC 2000 did, and a process with the supply chain investigation and integration of supply chain that is going to work well on projects. And again, there are audited case studies in respect of PPC 2000 that show that that success. In other circumstances, it isn't. You look at the highway industry, for example, so infrastructure projects as an example, you don't see that moving away from the NAC form. Other clients are very used to have set up their processes entirely to align to JCT. So in those circumstances, I think overlaying the relationships across the entire construction team with FAC makes sense. If you're not going to, and equally, if you have a pipeline of projects, again, it makes sense to be using FAC, integrating other forms of construction contract other than PPC. So you have options depending on the circumstances. I think there will always be an opportunity to use either PPC or FAC.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm aware that we are rapidly running towards the end of our time, and we are not going to get through all the questions that have been asked. But let me take this moment to say thank you so much to Mac and to David for your time today, for your presentations. It's been so interesting to hear what you've shared. And we must also thank the Building Centre for making everything work on this webinar from the back end. If you haven't had time to ask your questions, or we haven't got to the questions that you've asked and you want to learn more, David and Assad's colleagues from Trowse and Hamlets are giving a 45-minute in-person workshop on day 2. That's Thursday the 13th of the New Homes and New Ways Summit, which I mentioned before. So do book your tickets, details, costs, etc. are all available on the Housing Festival website or on the Building Centre's website, and you'll have the opportunity to make the most of talking to people in person about your projects, about our projects, about all the kind of theory of this, and also the practical application of it as we move forward. Also, the programme of the whole 2-day summit is available on our website as well. So if you want to see what else is going to be talked about, and however all the other sessions as well that you want to get hold of, do have a look on that. As I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is one of a series. There's a number of webinars that are being put together for free as part of the New Homes and New Ways exhibition. So please don't forget to sign up for the next one, which will be on the 23rd of January at 1 p.m. until 1:45, same as this one. And it is going to be about innovative concrete, specifically looking at the advancements in housing solutions. And we're going to be joined by Elaine Toogood, who's the Director for Architecture and Sustainable Design from the Concrete Centre. And we're also going to be joined by Simon Harold, the Business Development Director for PCE Limited. So that is shaping up to be a really good webinar as well. So do join us then. But all that is left for me to say today is thank you so much for joining. And we do hope that you will come along to one of our other webinars, or we can meet you in person at the summit. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.